Okay, good afternoon and welcome to today's panel. Let me start over. Good afternoon and welcome to today's panel, Centering Ableism and Our Commitment to Social Equity. I am Dr. S. Nicole Diggs, and I will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. As we enter into Invisible Disabilities Week, it's important that we have these conversations because disability is part of diversity and intersects all identity. And there can be no justice if we neglect it. I'm glad that so many are able to join us today. And I would like to take this time to welcome and give a special thank you to Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III, the past DSJ president and co-founder of the Journal of Social Equity, for joining us today. So we are glad to have you, Dr. Johnson. I will start by, I will start by welcoming and introducing our panel. And then I will do a quick announcements on what to expect during this panel, and then we'll have our discussion and questions and answers. So please help me welcome our panelists today. First, we have Ashley Glass, who is the director of BOSS, which stands for Bravely Overcome Self-Sabotage, which is a documentary, and the co-producer of Presence Over Presence, Black Fatherhood, the documentary. Ashley is a loving single mother of 3 beautiful girls, a business owner of Black Women Cultivating Change, where she hopes to advocate, educate, and provide platforms for mental health in the Black community. Ashley feels that documentaries help give a visual of the health disparities that African Americans face every day. She is a nursing student and is passionate about women's health, mental health, and health equity. Ashley is very involved in the community and also works as a maternal mental health program manager for Best Point Behavioral Health. Ashley stands by her quote that life is not surface level and challenges others to be kind and practice grace to everyone. So welcome, Ashley Glass. Next, we have Shelby Bedford, who is an equity practitioner in higher education, focusing on implementing community-based participatory methods for equity compliance and inclusive development. Using an intersectoral and interdisciplinary lens, Shelby works to identify and address barriers to access experienced by students, faculty, and employees. Recognizing these barriers are systems of institutional oppression, Shelby simultaneously works to help and facilitate institutional change initiatives. Shelby received her MA in Human Rights from the University of Arizona and her bachelor's in Sociology, Anthropology, and Global Studies from the University of Illinois, Springfield. She currently leads UIS's Access and Equity Office and serves as the institution's Title IX, Title VII, and ADA coordinator. Welcome, Shelby. Finally, we have Ashley Robbins, who is an MPA student at North Carolina Central University. She is employed by Duke University's Disability Management Systems as an assistive technology coordinator, connecting disability students, employees, and visitors with the appropriate software, auxiliary aids, technology, etc., to provide equal access. Ashley is also heavily involved in the Durham County community, with her work primarily centered around disability and accessibility. In August of 2022, Ashley completed the City of Durham's inaugural Community Partner Development course, where she presented a project on improving community engagement and accessibility for disabled members of her community. as well as providing training and consulting services to community organizations around accessibility as a central tenet of equity and inclusion. Ashley's goal is to make the Hayti Heritage Center a historic Black gathering space in Durham, North Carolina, a fully accessible, inclusive space. Her work in Hayti honors the legacy of Lydia Moore Merrick, a Durham resident for whom the gallery in Hayti is named. Moore Merrick established the Negro Brazil magazine, which was the first and only publication for Black blind folks. Please help me give a warm welcome to our panelists, and I look forward to this discussion. We ask that each panelist speak for 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Jose has given me some other responsibilities this morning. We have a couple announcements. The chat feature has been disabled. Attendees are asked to submit their questions and comments using the Google form provided to them in the chat. We will try to address as many audience questions and comments as time permits. We also have a link to a recent publication in PA Times that looks at centering ableism and our commitment to social justice. That was written by yours truly. So we will get started with our first presentation, or with our first presenter, Miss Ashley Glass.
Good morning, everyone. I will wait just a second. I have a PowerPoint.
Technical issues. Of course, my computer decides to move slow on today.
No problem. I can kind of speak to some of the slides that I kind of know what they are.
I think I got it.
So today I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome. My name is Ashley Glasses. You had mentioned I'm the owner of Black Women Cultivating Change. We really work to eliminate the stigma related to mental health and wellness in the Black community. If we could go to slide, we can jump down to slide 4, it's fine. Yep. So like I said, we're going to go over imposter syndrome. And so according to Harvard Business Review, imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. So a lot of times I get the question, what I guess kind of compelled me to really look into imposter syndrome. I myself have suffered from imposter syndrome, but I didn't know what to call it, I guess you could say, until furthering my studies. I have my master's in public health, and recently went back to school for nursing. And during my mental health clinical, we learned a little bit more about mental health and that sort of thing. So imposter syndrome is you'll have the degree, you'll have the experience, you'll have the certifications, but there's still a little voice inside of you that's just telling you, no, you're not ready for this. No, you shouldn't apply for this. No, you shouldn't do that. Just because you have the degree, don't apply for the job, that sort of thing. And so what I did with this information is I directed a documentary called BOSS, which stands for Bravely Overcoming Self-Sabotage. I looked at 16 women in leadership positions here. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and kind of interviewed them on how they overcame imposter syndrome on their road to success. And so these women were from all different fields and backgrounds, some education, some healthcare, as well as some political leaders and that sort of thing. But there was a trend with all of these women. They all admitted to having imposter syndrome, and they all kind of went through how they had to overcome that on their road to success. So if you click slide number 5 and that link, just wanted to show kind of the trailer. And you can find this documentary on YouTube. If you search BOSS and it's under Black Women Cultivating Change, which is my organization's name. It's a very short clip, so.
My technical issues are kicking in.
If it does not come up, I will just kind of speak to. So if you want to look it up on your own time on YouTube, again, it is BOSS, and you can find the trailer or the actual whole documentary itself. Let's see. See if we can get it to
do something. Can everybody see my yep.
I see your screen, but it's on the slide still, the slide page.
Okay, hold on. I apologize, everyone. I don't know who gave me authorization to handle the slide stuff. Can you see it now?
Yes, yep, it's
Okay.
showing. The only thing now is I don't think we have the audio coming through. And so, oh, there it is.
Can you hear it?
No.
If you could just speak to it and we'll make sure to share. You're on mute, Ashley.
Sorry, with those interviews, well, they just kind of was a high level kind of explain kind of things they have gone through. What I can speak to is I do a lot of work in the community, as I mentioned, and we're kind of the gap between the community and the therapist. So I am not a clinical therapist, but I try to get people comfortable enough to talk about mental health and what they're experiencing. So we have different programs and advocate for different services. If you want to go to slide 6, we can speak to just some of the signs and symptoms that you may be experiencing if you have imposter syndrome. Okay, so as I had mentioned before, you might feel afraid of being outed as a fraud. So with that being said, even let's say you even have your nursing degree, but you just still don't feel like you're qualified. Over preparing, so you may have a report due, or let's say you're planning for a big event, and you just, let's say you might lose sleep, feel like you're never fully prepared. Blaming accomplishments on luck. So you don't, if anybody gives you any compliments or positive feedback, you don't really know how to take it. It's more of like, man, I must be a lucky person, not attributing it to the hard work that you have done to accomplish what you have. Distrusting of others. So this can show up as maybe you might switch jobs often. You might just not gain very close relationships with others just because you just have this lack of trust or you don't want people to, as the first bullet point shows, find you as a fraud, although you're really not, but it's just kind of this second guessing yourself all the time. And then again, dismissing positive feedback. So that is kind of the signs. Just some resources that we have found that were successful if you are someone who is suffering from imposter syndrome. The people you are close with, kind of talking with them, letting them know kind of, I guess, how to let you know if you're not acting yourself. So a lot of times it helps having an extra set of eyes on you, especially if you're suffering from something internal. You might not even realize that you're displaying erratic or different behavior. So the close friends you do have, kind of maybe talking to them about what you're feeling and letting them know if they see you exhibiting any of these odd behaviors or that sort of thing, or just truly just not acting yourself, to bring it up. Also, of course, we advocate for therapy. So just having a therapist. And what I like to say with everyone is therapy is not just when you are experiencing a challenging moment in your life. Therapy is like an appointment with your primary health physician. So look at it as a checkup and that sort of thing. And then also just different support groups are trying to, I guess, find resources in your area. I know here in Cincinnati, when we released this documentary, we were able to kind of get together a group of women, maybe in similar professions as you, or in kind of close on the career ladder as you, and being able to be transparent about your challenges and that sort of thing, professionally or academically. And so my presentation's a little shorter because it was supposed to incorporate the video, but welcome to any questions if anybody has on imposter syndrome, or if you're not familiar with the term, or if there is anything that I can speak to regarding what we do. This slide just says, according to 1 in 5, which is a local organization here, 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness in one given year. So it's very common for people to experience a mental illness or mental health crisis or just mental health issue. And then this quote just says, "It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Then the victory is yours. It cannot be taken or by hell." So this quote speaks to imposter syndrome is definitely more of like an internal battle, and why I thought it worked good with this conversation today is just because you may be working with someone or going to school with someone and have no idea what they're battling every day to come into work or going into the classroom. So thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Please be mindful to use the forum to share your questions, so we can ask those at the end of each panelist discussion. Next, we will ask Shelby.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Bedford, and I do not have a PowerPoint today. I really just wanted to kind of help start a conversation that will come throughout this presentation, and then later on during some question time. But I wanted to highlight a few areas where ability discussions really should be centered in our discussion of advancing social equity. So first and foremost, recognizing that the inequality is exacerbated for people of disability or disabled people who are members of other minority groups. So recognizing that intersection of disability with other minoritized and marginalized identities really enhances the extent to which people are discriminated against, harassed, as well as their lack of access to various resources and public areas. So first, looking at public policy, I wanted to talk a little bit about both, compliance not equaling equity, as well as a little bit of just some points on the politicization of bodies. So the ADA first, it places an emphasis on an individual's responsibility to seek validation of their experience with their health in order to receive accommodations. So this leaves an individual with a disability vulnerable to the validation of their workplace device in order to receive anything that they may need in order to successfully access the employment environment. And this really serves to reinforce the power imbalances experienced by people with disabilities, as well as increase or really decrease their access to employment environments and then social mobility as an extent of that. So this also can disproportionately impact those with invisible disabilities, as well as those with other marginalized identities, as they will often be required to provide more extensive proof, so to say, of their disability because of this very normed understanding of what disability looks like and what it's supposed to look like and what somebody with a disability is supposed to be acting like. So it really enforces this reductive understanding of what a disability is and what it means to be an individual who experiences a disability attempting to access employment or public services or whatever that may mean. In addition to this, recognizing that medical certification required for access or for accommodations may be cost prohibitive to some. So thinking about the fact that, especially now, there's lots of forms that doctors are having to fill out, and where they used to be able to potentially just drop a form off at the doctor's office and get it the next day. Doctors are now requiring a fee, if not an individual appointment, to get that form filled out. So not everybody may have access to their doctor or to the funds necessary to pay their doctor to fill out those forms in order to enhance their access to employment. And this can really be an example of a disability penalty that exists within society, where people with disabilities are forced to bear the brunt of their extra medical care, as well as access funding and use of their own personal finances to prove to some sort of institution or process that they require an accommodation or that they require a different form of access. Also, bringing us back to the fact that ADA fails to recognize or address the needs of those with multiple layers of oppression based on race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and more. So again, circling back to the fact that anybody with a disability, as well as one or more other multiple minoritized identities, is going to likely have a harder time accessing the services required because of their disabilities. So putting that at the forefront of our thoughts when we're engaging in discussions about social equity is going to be absolutely vital. So this lack of intersectional approach in the efforts to advance social equity effectively renders invisible the needs and experiences of those who are most marginalized. And kind of along those same lines, just the political view of people with disabilities and bodies and what they are supposed to look like. There is very much a standard norm of what disabled is supposed to look like and what experiences they're supposed to have. If you go out onto the sidewalk and really just ask 10, 20 random people to maybe draw a picture or describe someone who is disabled, it's going to be this very standard kind of response. And again, this really serves to render invisible the multiple experiences of disability across the disability community. Ableism itself is forged through white supremacy and capitalistic domination, where bodies are valued for their ability to produce profit. And that kind of goes along with these intersections of sexism and racism, in that there's this established norm of what bodies are supposed to look like, what they're supposed to be able to do, and what they are supposed to be able to do for society. And in this white supremacist or capitalist kind of box, any individual who is disabled is going to be deemed to be unproductive or a member of society that's not contributing what they are supposed to be contributing. So if they're not looking and functioning in a certain way, in multiple ways, the systems and the institutions and society and community around those individuals are going to oftentimes exert harm on that individual. And you can see this to an extent through attacks on things like Medicare, disability benefits, abortion rights, and things of that nature. So really just wanting to present all of those concepts as a way to kind of serve as a foundation in our discussions about advancing social equity and what it looks like to center disability when considering advancing social equity. And then a kind of quick second point is what it looks like to center disability and ability in advancing social justice and social equity within public institutions. So it was mentioned earlier that I am situated in an institution of higher education. My role on campus is to look at access and equity issues. So this is really an example that fits into my specific setting, but can also be kind of taken and applied elsewhere too. But I mentioned that, ADA compliance does not equal equity. And I think that the flip side of that is understanding that universal design is one way that we can look to advance social equity without requiring individuals with disabilities to be kind of active in this power imbalance that can be present in accessing ADA accommodations. So when I say universal design, for anybody who's not familiar, that's really the concept of looking at your environment, both physical and non-physical, when it comes to policies, procedures, norms, and all of that, and looking at what you can do to make sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible without requiring them to have to go through an accommodation process. So this kind of takes the idea of 30 years ago when ADA was first formed and people were putting in ramps and things like that, so that somebody in a wheelchair can access a building without having to ask for support. This is kind of the next iteration of that, while recognizing that wheelchair ramps are not going to solve all of the issues at hand when it comes to access. So recognizing that there's a parallel between the trends related to social mobility experienced by those who don't access higher education and those who have disabilities is important when thinking about universal design. So for example, the disabled community experiences above average rates of poverty, incarceration, social segregation, while the benefits of higher education have been cited as including better health status, lower mortality rates, lower incarceration rates, larger social networks, and higher income. So this concept of providing universal design within higher education is important because higher education can be seen as a way to counteract some of the negative forms of oppression experienced by the disabled community. I also wanted to note that universal design can be applied to employment as well. So for instance, looking at your remote work policies, a lot of people now with long COVID and things like that are experiencing extreme fatigue. They may not be able to get out of bed even though they can check their emails. So looking at ways that you can generally improve the structures within your environment and the processes that guide your general operations and functions, and considering how those can be adjusted to make sure that, if possible, an individual with a disability automatically has access rather than having to go through that difficult and sometimes very costly, sometimes embarrassing process of accessing accommodations is another way that we can look at centering disability in advancing social equity. So that was probably just like a lot of gibberish that I spewed at you, but I'm hoping that can help us kind of transition into the next part of our discussion with just some things to continue thinking about as we're engaging. And then I look forward to the discussion following that as well.
All right. Thank you, Shelby. And it wasn't a whole bunch of nonsense. We were able to follow. Now ask Ashley Robbins. Ashley Robbins, you do have co-host privileges, so you can go ahead and share your PowerPoint presentation. And I'll just ask, as she's setting that up, Jose just put in the forum where you can have your feedback. So please provide us with feedback. Thank you, Ashley.
Are you all able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. So, and being mindful if there's anybody in the audience, because this is an unknown group of folks. If there's anyone who needs any visual descriptors for any images that I post, please let Jose know, and that can be brought to my attention, and I will verbally describe any images on the screen for anybody who may be visually impaired or have low vision. So I'm sure in our DEI conversations, we've all probably seen this graphic depicting equality, equity, and our reality. And sometimes there's usually just 3 boxes, and the 4th is usually blank for folks to kind of draw their own image. But on this particular one, I picked the liberation box. And so the images here depict what the reality is, where there's a barrier here, and there are certain people who are able to see the game. Looks like there's a baseball game in the background here, and there are 3 different people at various heights trying to see the game. And then there's one person who has the resources to stack boxes so they can see everything. There's one person who has a box that allows them to see a little bit. And then there's one person who has a box but still can't see. And so this just kind of depicts like the differences between equity and equality, where in equality, we're all given the same resource. But because our systems are unequal, having access to the same resources doesn't ensure equity. Equity is giving folks the resources that they need in order to access particular events or items. And then liberation is actually removing the barrier. So nobody needs anything additional to participate. We all have the same capability, the same ability to participate. And this is important in social equity because 1 in 4 adults in the US has some type of disability. So 25% of the population identifies as a person with a disability. I myself am diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety, as well as chronic health conditions. So I do identify as a person with a disability, and I try to disclose that in these presentations because disclosure is important to let folks know who's in the room and ensure that there's representation of folks who have disabilities in these conversations. That's important. But in 2030, people 65 and older will outnumber children. And as we know, when you get older, there are certain ailments. Mother Nature takes its course. Your hearing may devolve a little bit. Your vision may not be as good. And you may experience some level of disability the longer that you live. By 2050, the number of blind and visually impaired people is expected to be double. And due to COVID, we're still unsure and unclear of the long-term effects of long COVID and how a great percentage of our population will eventually identify as a person with a disability. And so it's important to get on top of disability and centering ableism and accessibility in social equity, because we can't wait until those folks start to really experience the damages of COVID. We need to get on top of that and ahead of it and work towards our systems to preemptively address long COVID. And disability status is the one social identity that we can all become at any time, either temporarily or permanently. It doesn't discriminate based on age, gender identity, sexual orientation. Anybody of any age can be disabled. It doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, trans, Black, white. We all are subject to being disabled, which makes it even more important to center accessibility and disability in our conversations about social equity. So just some key considerations for folks to think about on this topic is that accessibility is not an afterthought. So your organization needs to center accessibility from the beginning. Any type of programming, information you're dispersing should have accessibility at the forefront, or you're not effectively practicing equity. You can't release information and wait for somebody to say, this is not accessible to me, and then try to fix it. The goal is to be on top of that from the beginning. And I think I mentioned already the implications of COVID and long COVID and how that's going to force us to rethink how we approach disability and social equity. Oops, sorry. So just a little bit about the social versus the medical model of disability. The medical model, which is what most of our systems are based on, it frames disability as an individual problem. So you have a medical condition or an issue that prevents you from doing something. So there's something you need to do to fix that. You need to have medical treatment, you need accommodations, you need all these other things to help you, the person with the disability. Whereas the social model states that society is kind of designed in a way that is intentionally exclusionary to folks. And we need to start there, start working on those societal barriers and not put it on individuals to mitigate their own challenges based on how society is designed. So October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so this is a graphic from the Office of Disability Employment Policy that employers are encouraged to promote and indicate to their staff that they embrace disability as a part of DEI, and disability is central to the equity equation. So it's just some steps to some questions for consideration in your organization. What steps is your organization taking to destigmatize disability? So like I just self-disclosed my disability. So what in your jobs are you doing to destigmatize disability and make your employees feel more comfortable disclosing that they have a disability and asking for the necessary support? What is your organization doing to recruit and retain disabled employees? With the change in the hybrid work environments and more remote work, it's a great opportunity for employers to actively recruit employees with disabilities, because disabled folks are left out of the job market because they may have transportation issues. They may not be able to physically be present in a workspace, but may also be able to do the work. And having that opportunity to work at home has increased the ability for disabled folks to get engaged in the workforce. Are your employees educated on your accommodation process and grievance procedures? So if one of your employees has a disability, do they know how to get the support they need to complete their job functions? Do they know what their rights are? Are you actively educating other members of the organization on how to interact with employees with disabilities? It's got to be a constant, consistent part of your engagement strategies. And so this is just this National Disability Employment Awareness Month graphic is kind of just comparing some of the things that are being done with what really needs to be done. And we've all experienced these things in some form or another, whether it's related to gender, sexuality, racial sensitivity. It's kind of, you do the trainings and webinars, you have the guest speakers, you give work to employee resource groups, but does that really move the needle anyway? Is that really changing the culture in your organization? So instead, what some of the things that need to happen are updating annually your DEI communication and your goals, objectives, and outcomes. So you can gauge how effective your strategies are in recruiting and retaining employees with disabilities. Intentionally seek recruiters who understand disability employment and know where to actively seek out employees who are disabled. Is your organization partnered with vocational rehab or some local organizations that help people with disabilities get jobs? And finally, assess and benchmark your disability climate and culture. So, survey your employees, ask folks questions anonymously about their experience so you can get the feedback. This is also just kind of another graphic regarding equity and equality and kind of what the difference is and some of the things to consider in order to be more inclusive for employees with disabilities or folks with disabilities in your organization. And I've listed a couple of action items. I try to include a few things that when I do presentations or talk about disability that folks can actively do. They don't really cost anything. And it doesn't matter what your role is in any organization, it's something that you can do and pass it on to other folks. So one important thing is to follow disability advocates and content creators on platforms such as LinkedIn and amplify their voices. I've listed 4 that I personally follow on LinkedIn. Is Brittany Wilson. Brittany Wilson is a Black disability advocate and the director of Civil Rights and Disability Justice Clinic. Lily Zhang is a DEI strategist. Emily Ladau is a disability rights advocate, and she wrote a book called Demystifying Disability, which is named as a cornerstone and a must read for folks that are really interested in centering disability and being a better advocate and ally for the disabled population. Enabling captions in your online platform and turn them on at the start of every meeting. So that's a big one for me. I've been in meetings with folks who have said transitioning to online has been a nightmare for them because folks don't turn on the captions and they're not able to fully participate in the conversation. So they wind up either disengaged or leaving the conversation because they can't hear what's going on. There's no context for them to follow, or they need text to accompany audio in order to process, and that's not there. And so it's a very simple step that really promotes accessibility and lets your audience know that you care whether or not they are able to participate in the conversation. And all it takes is enabling it in your Zoom settings and then turning it on at the start of every meeting. And so it would automatically generate captions, and folks can save those captions if they need to, or it's just a great supplement to audio because some folks have audio are deaf or hard of hearing and require text in order to participate. And the third is to include all alt text on all images. And alt text is like a description of an image, so that if someone uses a screen reader, when they are reading your online material, the screen reader will describe that image. So if I have an image here and I don't have alt text, then it doesn't tell the person what they're looking at, so they're not able to fully engage. And the final action item I have is to add an accessibility statement to all communication. And I put a sample here that I put on the materials that I send out for our organization. And it says, our organization strives to make all of our events and programming accessible to all. If you need anything to assure you are able to fully participate, please contact our accessibility advisor. And that sends a cue to folks. Okay, they are interested in making sure I can participate. I know I might need an ASL interpreter, or I'm in a wheelchair and will need to have a seating with a companion seat available. So I know that I can reach out to somebody and let them know, as opposed to showing up to an event and trying to make do with what's already there. And so that's a good way to kind of give folks a heads up that accessibility is at the forefront. And you're thinking about those things by just simply putting that accessibility statement. And it also allows you to gauge and get an idea of what your audience, some of the disabilities that your audience may have. And so you can preemptively start making some changes to how you do things. And just some final thoughts. This diagram here is the nothing about us without us, and that's like a rallying cry for the disabled community, which is that disabled folks need to be a part of the conversation, every conversation. Disabled folks are disproportionately impacted in outcomes as it relates to healthcare, police violence, poverty, medical issues, employment, and housing policy. So it's essential to include disabled people in these conversations so that we have their perspective when we're making policy and when we are trying to make changes, so that it is included until we can get to the point of universal design, as Shelby stated. And if you speak to folks in the disabled community, we'll say that it's about progress, not perfection. Folks aren't expecting you to completely revamp your organization overnight. They just want to know that you're hearing them and you are making those changes. And so if we have a discussion about captions, they want to know, okay, you heard me. So the next time we have this meeting, I shouldn't have to say to turn them on, that lets folks know that you're paying attention and you're centering their needs. And the benefits of universal design benefit everybody. It's called the curb cut effect. So I'm sure you've all seen in curb cuts on walkways where the curb is cut out and dips down, and it was designed for folks that use wheelchairs. But you've probably seen people pushing strollers or grocery carts or any other thing more than you've actually seen somebody in a wheelchair utilize that. So even though that's why it was designed, it benefits people other than disabled folks. Closed captions benefits people who may not be deaf or hard of hearing, who may just want, it's too much going on in my background and I can't hear, but I can follow along with the text. So I might not be disabled. It just may be more convenient for me to read the text than to actually listen. So that helps. Ramps, elevators, power doors, all of those things benefit all of us regardless of our disability status. And these are just some resources for folks to, if you're interested in learning more about disabilities and how you can positively impact your organization and center accessibility. These are just some different sites that have trainings, free trainings, anything you could pretty think of. Ask Jan. If you're an employer, you can select a disability and it'll tell you all the common accommodations associated with that disability. So you can kind of get an idea of what you may need to do to accommodate a potential employee at your organization. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Ashley. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences, expertise on mental health and disabilities, and providing us ways to rethink how we conceptualize disabilities and giving us these action items so we can really question practices and policies that are currently in place to be more inclusive. So I thank you all for that and the challenge of making sure that we are more inclusive. I have a few questions. We have about 10 minutes, so hopefully we can get through a few of these. The first question is, how can we better incorporate those with disabilities without requiring them to ask for accommodations? That is, how can we work to change cultures to be more inclusive of all? And that is open to anyone who wants to take it or all who wants to take it, the question.
I can start us off here. Ashley and I both mentioned universal design, and that is very, very much a process. I don't know that there's any endpoint to engaging with universal design, but doing things like, listening to, you can start off, a lot of institutions and employers start off with your basic ADA accommodation process. But then taking that a step further, the first step may look like, okay, I can accommodate this one person's need. Now, how can I implement this across my institution so that next time somebody doesn't necessarily have to come to me to ask for that, it's automatically available. So that can look like that can be a good example of a step one. The other thing is making sure that you have kind of an open-ended outreach to your community to make sure that if they're coming up with frequent barriers for, based on whatever need they have, that they have a way to communicate that to you so that you can, again, respond in an institution-wide manner. So that kind of draws back to this idea of community-based participatory methods, where you're maybe conducting annual climate studies that have point you toward your disability community so that you can hear what they're thinking there, and then involving them, just like that last slide that Ashley had, nothing about us without us is for us, including them in, okay, what does a solution look like? Because as a person, as a person who may or may not exactly understand what someone may be experiencing, I can come up with a solution that may then create another problem. So making sure that you're including someone in that discussion when looking at implementing a universal design approach would be another important fact for me.
I just want to say my experience. I can think of when I was a student, I didn't even know there were disability services available. I didn't know what the tests looked like. I didn't know what the assessment looked like. I didn't know how that could have helped me in my experience as a student. So I think we need to do better even promoting disability services. A lot of times people think worst, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but they don't understand disability even on the level of your way of learning in the classroom, I guess you could say. Like that never even crossed my mind until I had some challenges myself. So I think we need to be more proactive, maybe even during orientation with these students as they're coming into higher education, really promoting disability services, and maybe even, I don't know if we can look to other terms besides disability, but making it more of, I don't know if a universal screening we can do for all students as they come in, so people don't feel like they have to go to quote unquote a disability assessment, but maybe, since it is so common, why isn't everyone assessed? Because at the end of the day, a lot of us have gone through life. I was 30 plus when I found out, I was dealing with some learning disabilities. So how can we make this more inclusive even for everyone, I guess, in the terminology that we use, and be more proactive?
I think just demonstrating a willingness to divorce from the way we always do things, because there's a tendency to kind of be very married to the way things have been and this is how they are, and not being willing to let that evolve and change. And disabled folks are the experts of their experience, and so just involving more people into these conversations is key. Like, representation does matter, so it does make a difference to have folks who are disabled represented at various levels of an organization, but also realizing that disability is broad and disabled people aren't a monolith, so there's not the same wants and needs. And just kind of, we've all seen a commercial or something to go out, and you can say that there clearly wasn't enough Black people or Asian people or gay people at the table when this was made. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten pushed out in this way. And so just bringing more people to the table and to the conversations and having those perspectives, because folks will lead you to the areas that you don't see and aren't privy to if it's not your experience.
Okay, thank you all. I think we have time for one more question. And there was one specific towards Ms. Bedford, and your experiences with, have you encountered white supremacist ableism, and where individuals demand certain output by their employers? If so, how has she ensured the disabled individuals received equitable treatment?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think I would first point to ableism being founded in a white supremacist framework. So you really can't, in my opinion, experience experience disability, or rather experience harassment or discrimination based on a disability without also interacting with that white supremacist framework that that society was built upon. So that's the first, I would say. The second, so was it the question? The second part of the question was, has there been an experience where like, for instance, an employee requested a certain accommodation and the employer could not provide it? Is that accurate, Nikki?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, so that's also, you know, a very difficult give and take. We've talked a few times about, you know, we're looking for progress, not perfection. Institutions can't change overnight. We can recognize, like, hey, we can do better, and make that commitment to doing better moving forward, but we may not be able to implement everything all at once. So I think having that discussion with the employee, having that discussion with the supervisor, and really pushing those norms. So first step that I always take when a supervisor says, for instance, no, we can't accommodate that, that's an undue burden. It's then, okay, why can't you accommodate that, and exactly what is the undue burden? And then making sure that you're engaging in those conversations, not only for the effect of either shutting it down and saying, no, you're going to do this, or, oh, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but engaging in that conversation as a way to model what supervisors should be thinking through as they're determining whether or not something is an undue burden. And then, you know, the next step further than that is looking at, again, how we can implement a universal design that allows us better flexibility before we get to that part of having to negotiate with the supervisor on what they can or cannot do based on their current needs and the essential job functions. So that's a kind of a loaded question with a little bit of a loaded answer, but I think that hopefully that gets us started on thinking how to move those things, you know, through the ADA framework that is our operating manual, so to speak, when looking at accommodations, but then taking that the next step further.
Thank you. Oh, Ashley Robbins, do you want to step in?
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate on that and just say that racism is a form of ableism. Like, racism is the ultimate ableist perspective. If ableism is the preference of certain body types over others, then, you know, racism is the promotion of white bodies over all others. And so racism is a part of ableism. And so if we think about it in that context, that you can't separate it from white supremacist framework.
I want to thank each one of our panelists, Ashley Glass, Shelby Bedford, and Ashley Robbins, for your willingness to share your expertise on this panel. We look forward to speaking with you all again. Everybody who joined us today, thank you so much. Please feel free to continue to use the Google Forms with your questions and answers, and we will try to send those questions out to our panelists to get responses to your questions. Also, in addition, please be sure to give feedback on this event and future events. So our next event will be our second Teach-In featuring Dr. Jourdan A. Davis, Assistant Professor at UNC Charlotte. It is entitled an Election Day Teach-In, Misinformation, Disinformation, and Democratic Participation via Zoom. This will be held November 8th, 2022 at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And registration is open now. You should be seeing a flyer being posted from the section of DSJ, specifically Jose. Make sure to get that information out. Again, thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to for us being together in a conversation November 8th. Everyone have a wonderful day. Oh, and here's the flyer.